Hello. Today we are going to do a profile of American history. We're going to be talking about Bartolome de las Casas. So who was Las Casas? Well, he is also known as the defender of the Indians. He's one of the most important early opponents of slavery and influential advocates of the rights of Native peoples. Here's a quote about him. The thread that runs throughout the message of Las Casas is a prophetic one. His interest was in stopping the slaughter of his beloved Indians and bringing them the gospel message of the church he loved and served. In order to achieve these goals, the nation that he represented and the monarch he obeyed must come into line with the will and word of God. Las Casas knew God had appointed him as the messenger to his nation and on behalf of the Indians, and he wholeheartedly gave himself to this task. So, historical context. We're talking about the time in which the Spanish were colonizing the New World. So, we are in the midst of the Columbian Exchange and the encomienda system. Now, if you remember, the encomienda system is that system that provided the encomendero, that's the Spanish conquistador, Spanish person, with a plot of land and all of the labor on that land. So the people who lived there would have to pay tribute, would have to labor in mines or in fields, and all of that would go to the encomendero, and in return they would get to become a Christian. They would get to, they would have protection from rival tribes. It was supposed to be a mutually beneficial relationship, but in reality it was atrocious. Also at this time in Spain, slavery was a widely accepted practice, but beginning to be questioned. So new laws started to come into place that captives of war could be enslaved. However, only if they weren't Catholic. So during this time, we're seeing many indigenous peoples being killed through conquest and slavery and really disingenuous conversion efforts. So although a lot of the letters coming out of the New World were saying that immense conversions were happening, these were done at the tip of the sword and weren't really genuine. So who is Las Casas? Well, he's born in the late 1400s, died in the mid 1500s. He was Spanish. He came to the island of Hispaniola in 1502 and participated in the conquest. So he actually became an encomendero. He had a plot of land, he had laborers, and he went to essentially a church service, heard a message, and decided to become a priest himself. And so in 1514, he really couldn't find a way to combine his religious beliefs with the treatment of native peoples. And so he returned his encomienda, he returned his laborers to the governor in 1514. This is where we really see the life of Las Casas change. So he travels back to Spain, and he ends up taking, I believe, 12 additional trips back to the New World to continue to advocate for the better treatment of natives. Now, he originally did advocate for the use of enslaved Africans instead. So there was this racist component, but he later deeply regretted his advocacy and wanted wholeheartedly to oppose all slavery. So his advocacy, he ended up writing many tracts, many letters, books that would expose the oppression of the peoples in the New World, the injustices, the lies that the conquistadors were spreading back to Spain. He really condemned the Spanish encomienda system. His most influential work is likely a short account of the destruction of the Indies. It actually led to the new laws being signed by King Charles. And these were designed to protect American Indians, to limit the power. It was going to prevent slavery from continuing on generation after generation, but saying that the children of the laborers would be free. And so eventually the encomienda system would just die out. So it really did essentially abolish the American Indian slave system. However, it was not strictly enforced. Many of the encomenderos protested and led rebellions, and so the king kind of backpedaled and didn't enforce these new laws. So what a very important event that happens in Las Casas' career is the debates that happen at Valladolid in Spain. These were sponsored by the king. There were a panel of scholars that were listening to Las Casas and one Gines de Sepulveda as they debated the justification of native peoples. And so Las Casas was a clear advocate for the indigenous peoples, whereas Sepulveda wanted to justify the Spanish right to rule over them. And so this is really our earliest example of a moral debate on the subjugation and colonization of the Americas. So here's a section. This was not part of the actual debate, but it's another quote by Stapleveda, and it comes from his document called Concerning the Just Causes of War Against the Indians. So he's really giving it away in the title here. These are the just causes of war. The Spanish have the perfect right to rule these barbarians of the New World and the adjacent lands, who in prudence, skill, virtues, and humanity are as inferior to the Spanish as children to adults, or women to men. For there exists between the two as great a difference as between savage and cruel races and the most merciful, between the most intemperate and the moderate intemperate, and I might even say between apes and men. So, incredibly racist here. There's sexism. There's a lot to digest with Sepulveda, but clearly showing that those ideas of superiority that many Spanish did in fact feel towards the indigenous peoples. Las Casas, on the other hand, here's a section from his most popular work. Their reason for killing and destroying such an infinite number of souls is that the Christians have an ultimate aim, which is to acquire gold and to swell themselves with riches in a very brief time, and thus rise to a high estate disproportionate to their merits. It should be kept in mind that their insatiable greed and ambition, the greatest ever seen in the world, is the cause of their villainies. And also those lands are so rich and felicitous that native peoples, so meek and patient, so easy to subject, that our Spaniards have no more consideration for them than beasts. And I say this from my own knowledge of the acts I witnessed. But I should not say them beasts, for thanks be to God they have treated beasts with some respect. I should say instead, like excrement on the public squares. So here he's saying the cause of the treatment of natives is the greed. It's the gold. It's not that they're trying to bring Catholicism to them, as they were stating. It's that they wanted gold and wealth. And he says they literally treat them like poop. That's what he's saying there at the end. They're treating them less than animals. So what is the significance of Las Casas? He's an early influential leader of human rights campaigns. And there are more legal rights for Native peoples as a result of Las Casas. Even though they aren't strictly enforced, the laws do exist, which is often a first step towards obtaining better treatment. Unfortunately, he may have also increased the interest in the African slave trade and the justifications for slavery based on race. But in many cases, his arguments are still referenced today. So Bartolome de las Casas is a unique person in the history of the Americas, as he was adamantly and vocally against the treatment of native peoples, whereas the popular opinion would have been to support slavery and subjugation. So I hope you learned something. Like, subscribe, and we'll see you next time.